Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson number 15, and in this lesson we're going to try and accomplish a few different things. The first thing we need to accomplish is defining what exactly a digital audio workstation is, and then we're going to compare a few of them, and hopefully some of these misconceptions about what DAW to choose will be all cleared up for you. Truth be told, I'm choosing Bitwig to do this particular course for a variety of reasons, but in all honesty, no matter what digital audio workstation you're working in, you should be able to follow along and the concept should make sense from one to the other. I'll say up front, like there is no perfect digital audio workstation. Most of these softwares that we're looking at, they accomplish the same things. A lot of them just do it a little bit differently, and they all might have a few different nuances and subtleties to them that differentiate them from each other. But at the grandest of level, there is no one DAW to rule them all. And I hope you realize that by the end of this video, because what we're going to see is just how similar each of these programs is. So let's get started, and we're going to begin by trying to define what exactly a digital audio workstation is. Of course, like with any three-worded phrase, there's a three-letter acronym to go along, and in our case, it's DAW, which is also just shortened to DAW. For some reason, it's something I don't like saying all the time, but I've noticed I've said it a million times in trying to go through this course, so bear with me. I know it can be kind of an annoying word to say, but a digital audio workstation is a software designed for audio production, specifically digital audio production, at the most macro of level. What I mean by that is, and I'm going to use this analogy a number of times, let's imagine for a second that we're all painters and we're going into our art studio. The digital audio workstation is literally that building. It's literally that studio. Just by walking in there, we're not making art, but we're in the building, right? We're in the place where it's supposed to happen. And if anybody's ever been into an art studio before, you would know that about 50% of the people are just in there doing absolutely nothing, while the other 50% are actually trying to make some kind of art. And music is much the same way, only we're doing it all within the computer. I've seen a lot of people, and I know a lot of people, open up the digital audio workstation and then really don't do anything. So, the digital audio workstation in and of itself doesn't really do anything. If I just click play, there's just a number that's scrolling off, but no sound is coming out and nothing is really happening. Only recently has the digital audio workstation evolved into a full-fledged virtual studio. And originally, when this concept of the digital audio workstation came out, it was really designed more than anything else for actual recording studios to just kind of make their lives a little bit easier, to streamline some of the processes and put it into a computer so that they weren't constantly having to go over to a bunch of analog gear, fiddle this, that, and the other. Really, there wasn't a whole lot of plugins, there weren't a whole lot of instruments or effects, especially unique effects, only possible in the computer realm until, just fairly recently. The commercial professional digital audio workstation will typically allow the user to record or multi-track record audio, arrange, cut, edit, loop audio files, mix levels, and pan their relative positions. Also process audio using either built-in, external, or third-party processors. And we'll talk exactly about what that means as we move forward. Over time, digital audio workstations began to take studio technology and model and emulate it into a software form, and eventually became good enough where it became acceptable to use these plugins or these emulations of hardware devices that you'd normally only find in a studio. Suddenly you could get all of those in the computer, and not only as like third party or from other companies, but within the digital audio workstation itself. And some examples of that are synthesizers, effects, samplers, and really nowadays anything you could ever imagine. There are crazy tools and fun and unique software that's been developed, and some of that is unique to each digital audio workstation, and some of that comes from other companies, third party, that you can actually bring into your digital audio workstation. Because we remember the digital audio workstation is just the building, but within that building there are a ton of different rooms. There's a ton of different materials we can pull from and grab to and put onto our blank canvas. But this whole concept of the evolution of the digital audio workstation, this allowed for the very exclusive world of music production to become affordable for anybody who had a computer and access to this software. And now the most cutting edge experimental music is going to utilize computer or software in one way or another. When I'm talking about cutting edge, I'm not referring to Avicii. I'm referring to experimental composers who are taking some of these tools and really trying to do new things with them. By new things, I mean things you've never heard before. And the technology is always evolving. There's always sort of new techniques and processes and ways to manipulate sound. And that's what a lot of people on the cutting edge are working on, as well as like things like live coding and other sorts of crazy experiments with music. So the technology is constantly evolving, but that's a great thing in some ways, but in a lot of ways, it's really difficult then to know where to get started. Where before you might have a very, very simple DAW where it's obvious to know, okay, I have these few choices, so let's see what I can do with them, to now something just so absolutely crazy and mind-blowing that it can be very difficult to know where to get started. And hopefully in this course, we can together learn the right ways to get started and how to build our knowledge in a somewhat cohesive and logical fashion. So some common DAW misconceptions. Every DAW is radically different. People seem to think that there's that perfect digital audio workstation for them. And although it might be true, let's always remember that in terms of manipulation of audio, many of the functions and processes are going to be similar from software to software. It's just how it is. It's how this entire area has evolved. Also, there's this idea that only amateurs use particular types of software, while the pros are the ones using the quote unquote best. And yeah, it's true that most audio professionals are going to be using Pro Tools in like a professional grade studio, but there is a logical reason for that. And by no means is Pro Tools far and away the best. It's just unique. And going back to our example of the art studio. So there's going to be artists who might work in very, very nice and fancy and rich studios. And let's say like New York City is an example. So there are artists who work in very nice conditions. You know, I'm just like imagining Andy Warhol and like that kind of factory-based production he does. Imagine someone like Damien Hirst, like the environment that he works in, and then compare it to what Aboriginal Australians, the conditions that they work in when they're making their art, right? There's just two very different polar opposite environments, but both are making art. And who am I to say that one of those art forms is better than the other? I can make my own decisions on that and I could tell you guys what my opinion is, but it really doesn't matter because each and every one of us looks at it differently. And I think music is very much the same way. So whereas Pro Tools might be, you know, really cushy, really great, really flexible, just amazing, and the fact that you can do anything with it, that doesn't mean that the music that comes out of Pro Tools is any more or less interesting or important than the music that's coming out of just something free like Audacity. And it's up for the listener to make those decisions. No software in itself will allow for you to produce what you consider to be great music immediately. It all takes time. It all takes patience, like we said before. The DAW is just that physical location where everything else has to occur. A great artist will produce great art regardless of their surroundings and or their materials. So great artists are typically people who can adapt very well to whatever's in front of them. You know, you give somebody who's really creative, let's say you give them 3 audio samples and Audacity. If that person is really, really creative, they're going to be able to come out with something that's just absolutely mind-blowing and very, very interesting. At the same time, you give somebody who maybe isn't that creative, who's maybe a little bit lazy, You give them Pro Tools and all the bells and whistles, and they might come out with absolutely nothing. So it all depends, right? It all depends on the person, not necessarily the software that you're working with. Making the most and being creative with what you have, in my opinion, that's probably most important. But all that being said, it's time to be a bit of a hypocrite and let's compare some of the more popular digital audio workstations. And we're going to begin with Audacity. Audacity is a digital audio workstation in that it allows you to kind of manipulate and play with digital audio. It's very simple to use. However, it only uses audio tracks, so you're not going to find any virtual instruments, whether those would be built into the software itself or in plugin form. However, in terms of effects and plugins like that, it does support the LAD, SPA, Nyquist, VST, and audio unit effect plugins. I think it also will support the Vamp plugins that we looked at in earlier video, but some of these plugins won't necessarily work all that great. Some ideas for using Audacity, just off the top of my head, simply waveform analysis, which we've talked about a number of times, podcasting or vocal recording, simple audio manipulation or sample editing. Sometimes it's a great idea to bring Audacity up and then just drop a few samples that you've grabbed from wherever, and you can make some very simple fine-tune adjustments very easy and export out. And also if you're like a band and you want to do a very simple DIY band recording, a number of bands have kind of got their start that way using Audacity and just recording straight in there because it's very easy to use and it's free. If we want to look at their website, here it is. I'll link to it in the description to the video. We've already talked about Audacity a number of times, but let's open it up and take a quick look at it once again. So this is Audacity. It's very, very simple. And just to show you guys what you could possibly do with it, I need to bring up and record my other microphone so we can have two mics recording at once. I didn't do this before because I'm scared of in the video getting like a bizarre echoey type feedback, but let's do just a quick example so I can show you something in the program. Here we go. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 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 test to test, 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 test. All right, perfect. So for me, I have to be upfront with you guys. I'm using a audio interface. It's called the Duet, and it's going through my USB port on my computer. And I'm not actually 100% sure how you can put different audio tracks down at once and record on them all at the same time. It might be possible, it might not. I really don't know. I don't use Audacity that frequently unless it is for very simple sample changes or adding like fades and fades outs and just kind of cutting things up really quickly. But what you'll notice is I recorded 2-channel stereo. And with the Duet USB, let's see, is this going to open up? And with the Duet USB, what I have is 2 inputs, but they're each like mono inputs, or they could be combined to be one stereo input. So you can see my levels bouncing up here. Hopefully I have everything working correctly. And so when I record in here on stereo, I actually got 2 separate mono tracks. And this is really brilliant because what I can do now is I can take this and I can split my stereo to mono. And now I have my 2 tracks where let's undo it and let's just listen back quickly. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 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 test to test, 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 test. So what you probably noticed is there was a lot of emphasis there in the left channel because that was my input 1, and that's the input that I'm recording into exactly. My other microphone is just like in the back of the room right now, just picking up, you know, the bounces off the wall here, those reflections of my voice. But if I take it and I split it, I can now listen to them both. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, testing, testing. So that's mic 1, and then if I want to listen to mic 2, testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 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 test to test, 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 test. But the nice thing about this is if you were doing like podcast recording or something and you had 2 people, it'd be very easy to split these out. And then if I wanted to, I could, process this track with some built-in effects. I could process this track totally separately from this track, and it gives me that flexibility right there, which is really awesome. Let's just cover a couple of things, and you're going to see these in a lot of other digital audio workstations. Once again, in Audacity, there are no like instrument tracks, so I couldn't bring in a piano and start playing piano. But what I can do is a whole lot of manipulation to this audio if I wanted to. Like I could do a cut, which in that case wasn't really all that useful. But I could slice this up, and I can move things around, and I could copy and paste. This is all not really logical, but truth be told, if I had like the right kind of samples, I could make an entire like dance track or something in here. A little bit difficult because I don't have access to like BPM or any of that, but if you have the time and you're willing to be patient, you can do some pretty crazy stuff. This is our transport bar, and this is just indicating our playhead position. So if I go back to the beginning and I click play, testing, or pause, if I hit stop, I'll go all the way back to the beginning. Testing. Things like that. I could also then, hit record like we already did. And we're going to see this transport bar in a number of different applications. This is our basic like editing tool here, and you can just see what you have. We have our copy, we have our paste, we have a trimming tool, we have a sync lock. So a variety of different things in here. If you go up to your edit, you're also going to see a number of different things that you can do within the program, what it's going to let you do in these tracks. And it's not a bad idea, just kind of go through and see what you have. We have some analyze functions as well. So all of this in Audacity. And like I mentioned before, if we did just have a number of samples or something, we could bring in these samples, put them all on different audio tracks. We could have as many tracks as we wanted, and we could just bring these samples in and do something relatively interesting if we wanted to do that. So this is Audacity, pretty much the simplest of all, but it is available on both Mac, PC, and then I believe on the Linux systems as well. So I can close Audacity down. Moving over to what I would say is a very unique sort of digital audio workstation, and that's FL Studio. FL Studio is only for the PC, but if you're running your Mac in like boot camp mode, you can actually get it to work, assuming that you're using a Windows operating system. It's made by the Belgian company ImageLine. It's $200 for their producer edition, but they actually have software that's considered FL Studio for like $1,000. It comes bundled with a ton of different plugins and other devices and maybe samples as well. I don't know. It does come with a variety of instruments and effects, but I don't think it comes with any like audio loops or clips. I might be wrong about that, but I don't think it's well known for having a vast library of samples. In my opinion, it's really designed and aimed at beat makers and EDM producers. But just remember that just because something may be aimed that way doesn't mean that it's the only thing it can do. And FL Studio can definitely do anything you want it to do, but in terms of like recording an audio, trying to like record bands in on different tracks may not be the best option out there for you. Also want to mention that there is an add-on program, a DJ program called Decadence, which can actually run directly inside of FL Studio, which is kind of cool because you could then do some triggering of clips live, maybe do a bit of a performance type angle. A little bit tricky because it still is mainly based on a timeline view. They're trying to add new stuff in FL Studio 11 to make it so that you can launch clips to perform, but I haven't really heard of anybody having a ton of success with that as of yet. It's a flexible program, but it does offer a somewhat steep learning curve because it really works with like panels and things that are kind of all independent and all over the place. I'm going to show you what I mean in a second. And in my opinion, the interface is a little busy, and I don't particularly like the way the mixer is set up. It's very small, and it just is kind of comes up as a separate window. It does have some very nice sounding synths though, and other instruments. It also supports VST and VSTI plugins. Overall, I think FL Studio would work great as a sketchpad for a beat or EDM producer, but I personally could imagine things like mixing or mastering could be a little tricky just based on the way everything is spaced out on the window. But for some, that could actually be a great blessing. And there's a lot of very famous producers who work inside of FL Studio. This is the website here. You guys can check it out, see the different products. Their website isn't particularly great. There's a video on here, and always be aware that these videos are incredibly cheesy, but it will let you see what's going on. There's also a ton of videos out there on FL Studio, and I used to use FL Studio, I don't know, maybe 8, maybe 9. I definitely haven't used FL Studio since version 9, and then I thought it was pretty cool because it was very easy to like lay down a quick beat, throw in some chords, throw in a melody, and boom, you could have a song ready to go in just a couple of hours. But like I said, that can kind of be a blessing, but at times that can also be a curse as well. This is what FL Studio looks like for the most part. We see our familiar functions already. Here's our transport bar, but some added functionality already with a tempo, and this is a pattern button. You actually have to get deeper into the program to understand what's going on there. Here you can see that there's like a very basic like step sequencer. So if I want to, I would put a kick here, 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 and just like that I could have a 4 on the floor kick drum pattern, and I don't know, you can't see snare and anything else, but this is what I mean in the fact that it can get really, really busy really quickly. We see there's a browser on the left, and that browser is where you kind of find all your samples and also, you know, all of your plugins or different files that you, or your different instruments and stuff that you can use within FL Studio. But everything comes out as like these window type pop-ups, and so that can be a bit much, at least it is to me and in my opinion. But great program nonetheless. It's a lot of fun, but it's very unique. This mixer section is unique. Having the sequencer right in the middle is pretty unique. Having all these pop-ups, I find it to be very different from a lot of other programs out there, and that's why we looked at it first. The second thing I want to look at was actually Reason, and the reason that I'm talking about this program, which is made by the Swedish company Propellerhead now, is because it is so unique. The full version costs $400. It comes bundled with a lot of different sounds, a ton of different instruments and effects. There's definitely a tricky learning curve to this one, but it is a lot of fun if and only if you know what you're doing. It's a pretty clean interface, but it could get messy at times. However, I think it's very interesting visually. If you're very visually orientated and you like sort of seeing the things you're working on as tangible representations of those things, Reason is absolutely phenomenal for that. But it's really not designed for performance, or at least not yet. It would be very difficult to like trigger clips or do DJing in Reason. I don't know anybody who's tried that, but I could imagine it would be quite difficult to do, or to like set something up on the fly. Maybe not really designed for that. There are plenty of additional instruments and effects and loops which you can purchase separately. It's an awesome program, but it's very easy to get lost in. And I know I used this. It was one of the very first program. It might be the very first sort of program I ever used. And I know I opened it up, and for probably a few hours, I just kind of sat there and was scratching my head, had no idea what was going on, because it is a very complicated program. And I'll show you guys why in a second. It is so complicated, so much different. A couple things here. There is no plugin support when working with Reason, but you can rewire it into another DAW, which means that, let's say we were working in Pro Tools, we would have the ability to bring a Reason project into Pro Tools and grab the audio out of Reason. But you know, I, for one, am never really see the point of using like rewire in that way. It just seems like a lot of work. And instead, I would probably just work in Reason, get my parts done in there, and then bring them into Pro Tools. But rewiring is possible if that is maybe something that you're interested in. And we can take a look at the website here, a little bit nicer of a website than FL Studio. This is a good starter video to go on. They kind of show you what's going on. And just from this picture though, you can see that everything here is very, very visual, very distinct. And there's two main views to Reason. There's a front view, which I think they refer to as the rack view, where if you can envision a studio, typically there are racks and there's tons of gear, and Reason will take all of its devices and put them onto racks, and then it will either manually do some of the routing, or you'll actually have to flip it around so like you're looking at the back of the rack, and then you can manually do some stuff with the cables. That's one of Reason's most impressive features, but it can also be the biggest curse if you're just starting out and if you have no idea where you should be putting wires. It can get confusing really, really quick. But I would encourage you guys to check out their website, see some of the stuff that they offer, and watch this introductory video. Again, it's incredibly cheesy, but it lets you visually see what exactly is going on inside of Reason. And from this view, which is actually, I think, a real view, this came from the Sound on Sound article where they wrote about the newest Reason that was released. And from here, we don't see like a transport bar, a play bar, anything. It does exist within the program, but you can also get very lost in just all of this that's going on here. So I know it can be very overwhelming for people who are just starting out. Let's transition to talking about now a couple programs just for Mac. We'll begin with GarageBand here. And GarageBand comes free with, I think, pretty much all of the Macintosh systems that are being released now. It's very simple and user-friendly. I think it's a great starting digital audio workstation for anyone, and it's very easy to transition to sort of an upgraded version of this, which is the new Logic Pro X. Some things to be aware of: there is a lot of limited functionality and features within GarageBand, and there are no instruments where you can kind of like start from scratch, but it does offer audio unit plugin support, which is great. And so if you do have a couple of audio units, whether they're free or they're paid applications, you can bring those into GarageBand. Here's the website for GarageBand. What you're going to notice when I open up GarageBand is I haven't updated to the Mavericks operating system yet. So I'm not going to have all of these tools to me, but for the most part, it's going to be very, very similar. But now if you're working with GarageBand, you have a whole lot more at your disposal than what I'm even going to have. But let's open it up and take a look and see what's going on with this program. And let's see if we can pick out any kind of similarities. So the first thing we'll notice is our transport bar that we saw in Audacity and FL Studio being at the top. It's now down here at the bottom, but it works in exactly the same way. I can click play and go across, and I have a metronome here that's ticking away, but I could turn that off if I wanted to. I also have a looping function where I can loop a certain segment of audio, and in GarageBand that's real easy. So let's say I want to loop 2 bars. I can click play and it's going to loop from right there. Flips around. GarageBand is unique because it does offer a lot of free instruments to get you started. But like I said, you really can't edit those from scratch. And if I want to see what's going on inside of this program and what's going on any given track, I can hit this info button right here. And just like that, I can kind of change some things around. So right now we should be on the grand piano sound. If I click Command K and open this up, I should be able to play it. I think I was on the wrong one. Let's see. So we have our grand piano there. I don't have a MIDI controller hooked up, but you can use a MIDI controller here inside of GarageBand. If I want to change my instrument, I can do that pretty easily by just, I don't know, let's choose a string. Let's choose lunar strings. See what that sounds like. Pretty cool. And then if I want to get more in depth, I can click the edit tab here. And this is specifically going to be editing whatever track I have highlighted. So if I click edit now, we can see I'm on strings. I can select this, and I do have the ability to do a little bit of editing. Not a whole lot. Like I said before, I can't really start from scratch, but let's say I wanted to have a slow release and a slow attack. So the sound's going to fade in, and now when I let go, it's going to fade out quite slowly. And we can compare that to a very fast attack and a very fast release. All right, so pretty cool. And some of these you're going to be able to modify more than others, but there is nothing that's starting from blank. Below that, we have our effects, and effects here, we have a decent number. Interestingly, I think by default that there's always a compressor on there because I'm not able to like choose anything different. So that kind of sucks, but I can go in here and I can make the changes. So we do have things like an amp simulator, an auto wah, an automatic filter, bass amp, etc., down to the vocal transformer there. And if I want, I can open up my settings and I can make some changes here, more changes than I was able to make within the instrument. And it comes with a variety of presets, so you can check those things out on your own time if you want to do that. One pitfall, though, is that you can only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different effects going at once. I think by default, they always put an equalizer on, and you can, go in there and mess that around at your heart's content, or maybe use the presets. What are these two things down here? This is our first introduction to the concept of send and return tracks. For right now, just realize that these effects can impact any track we have on here. And at each level, at each track, I can adjust how much I want to send those to. Okay, so right now we don't have any echo. Let me take a listen. And now let's just boost that up. I can obviously add some reverb. Pretty cool. And if I want to adjust those, what I have to do is go to the master track, and right here we have our track effects, but you can also think of those as being the return effects. So if I go into my Moonbeam here, which is actually a plugin, I actually brought Massive in here, so you guys could just see that I actually still have access to third-party plugins if I want. Here it is. It does cut it off here at the bottom, which is kind of a pain. I don't really know how to adjust that unless maybe inside of Massive I can actually make it smaller. But I still have access to these same effects here. So right now it might just be like a saw wave or something. Let's see. But I could add echo to it. So pretty cool. And if I wanted to, though, like I said, I could go in here and I could, adjust these settings if I wanted to do that. Really, it's very easy to make a track in GarageBand and make one that's pretty cool. The thing to do, though, is just make sure that you understand what all of these panels down here are doing. And if you can understand that, you're going to have a very good idea of how most digital audio workstations are going to work. So if I don't want to see the info view, I can just click that there. This is going to give me access to all of the loops and some of the built-in tools that come with GarageBand. Let's see if I can actually get anything to come up. I'm not sure if I'll be able to. I don't know if I have anything in here, but let's select electronic. Some of these might be coming from Logic actually, but let's see. Let's see what this is. Uh-oh. Getting that spinning wheel of death, that's never a very good sign. I've opened up like a ton of different audio applications, so not surprising that it might freeze up on me here. But basically, you're going to have access. Whoa, I'm getting my preview down there, but I honestly don't want it. I can just drag it and bring it in here on a new track. And then if I want, I could loop it. Hit play. Right now we're in solo mode on those other tracks. Like I mentioned before, we have access to panning. And again, if I go into my info view there, I can make some changes if I want to do that. So not too difficult to make a full track in here, but as you can tell, there is some limits to what you can do. We can't like make any sounds from scratch, but we can't do a whole lot of audio manipulation. We also have access to this, which is our automation. And surprisingly, if you're working with a third-party plugin, this surprised me when I opened this up, I can go into my automation and I can go into massive, and I actually have the ability to change like a million different parameters if I know what I'm doing, which is pretty cool. But for now, let's just keep it simple. Let's adjust the track pan and let's throw it up over time. Start it way down. So yeah, you have a lot of flexibility with automation as well, which is pretty cool. And whenever you want, you can always just go in and add automation and then select something else. Like let's say I want to adjust the amount of echo send that's going on. I could do that too. And then I could go back to my pan and see the automation that's going on there. Don't think I have the ability to add different lanes, but for right now, not really all that important. If I wanted to, I could go in and I have my MIDI editing functionality in here too, so I could change some of these notes around. I even have a score function, which is pretty cool to maybe some of you, and some other options here. But for right now, we don't really need to concern ourselves with any of those. We do have our zooming parameters here, but it wouldn't be too difficult to make a full song here in GarageBand. And actually, we could make something pretty interesting, I think. You just kind of have to experiment and play around with it there. Let me make sure I actually quit this all the way out because it's going to just be slow me up. Moving over to what is really the upgrade now of GarageBand. It's called Logic Pro X, and Logic Pro X is actually very different from Logic Pro 9. They've done a great job of trying to make the transition from GarageBand to Logic very, very easy. It's only $200 in the App Store, which is an incredibly good price in my opinion. There's enough functionality and flexibility in here for professional quality tracks and tracks that you build up completely from scratch. It comes with a ton of loops and additional content you can download, which I think is fantastic, but it could also be a curse in some cases. There aren't really any performance options as of now if you wanted to perform live with Logic, apart from hoping to God that you just time everything absolutely perfectly. And it does support the audio unit plugin. So if we look at Logic Pro here, of course, I'll link to this, and they say music production cranked up to X. So they're taking that P90X advertising campaign and adjusting it for their own product here. So we can take a look at Logic Pro X, and like you can tell, most of the stuff is very similar. They've moved the transport bar up here. We can adjust our BPM and our key signature. Not that that necessarily is going to matter if we play outside of the key right now. And we have our tempo markings here right now in 4/4 time. There's our metronome. This is indicating our count in, but a lot of these things are the same. We can go back to our loops, and if we wanted to, we could find like a conga loop, maybe. Uh-oh, spinning wheel. Yeah, just like that, there's plenty of stuff in here if we wanted to drag and drop one in. Sure, why not? If I want, I can bring up my loop again, shorten it. Again, we have our panning functionality over here. We have our muting and soloing. No idea what this button actually does. Oh, they put monitoring. But basically, all the stuff is the same. The only difference is that there's a ton more functionality and it's a lot easier to use. Again, if you're going to be messing around with any digital audio workstation, first thing to do is to pull up and just mess with all of these tabs. So the first one is a library tab, and I'm not going to get into that because we already could see that in GarageBand. But in my info tab, this is very different from what we had in GarageBand. And here, right now I've selected this first track, so that's what I'm seeing over here. And what I could do if I wanted is to take this track, I could mute it. So actually, let's just do an example. Right here's just this electric piano that comes up by default. I could turn it off, so I'm clicking notes and not getting anything. Then I have the ability to open up the actual instrument itself, and I could make some changes, or for right now I could go in and let's do hip roads. Some of these presets are built in with effects as well. And even cooler, we have a GUI view change here. But now the very nice thing about Logic is that we can now begin to work from scratch with some of the devices they have. So if I select this last little icon here, I can pick all of the different devices that come with Logic. And some people would probably say they'd be willing to pay $200 for this Ultra Beat drum synth right here. I'll leave it to you guys to maybe grab a demo and play with these things. But really, there's a lot of incredible stuff in here if you just take the time. A very simple synthesizer here. Get a bass. Some very, very nice sounding instruments. And there's also some great effects in here. Just hundreds and hundreds of different effects and presets that you can grab. And like I mentioned before, when you get Logic Pro X, you can go to, let's see, it's on one of these. You can go to download additional content, and there's literally gigabytes and gigabytes of content that will come with Logic Pro X, and you can find most of those from this over here. I didn't show you guys the browser, but there's also access to the browser on your computer. So if you want to pull up and find any sort of clips or samples that you may have, you can grab them and pull them into your timeline. Very easy. There's also a more advanced MIDI editing function. This is the audio one, but with MIDI, we'd have That's lovely, isn't it? But we do have a lot more MIDI editing functionality down here than what we were able to see before in our example in GarageBand. So that's pretty much Logic in a nutshell, pretty much exactly the same from what we saw in GarageBand, and a lot of similar features to FL Studio, and even some similar features to what we saw in Audacity. So we can go ahead and quit Logic for now. Pull this back up. Let's see, where do we want to go? All right, we're going to transition now to talking about a few DAWs that all offer more or less the same functionality as Logic Pro. The only difference is that they'll come with different devices. However, those different devices are all going to be doing basically the same stuff. So just as an example, we were able to see a reverb and an echo unit, which we could also call a delay, inside of GarageBand. And there's one inside of Logic. There's multiple inside of Logic. There's also things like choruses, flangers, phasers. These other programs that I'm going to show you are going to have those effects too. They're just going to be native to that particular software package, and that's the only difference. They will sound slightly different, but their functionality is going to be the same. These other digital audio workstations will offer different layouts, and they'll have different ways of routing, of automation, etc. Reason offers everything that Logic offers, only its look and philosophy are like so radically different that I did want to talk about those separately like we did. There are other DAWs out there besides the ones I'm about to mention, but I decided I'd stick with software that runs on both Windows and Macintosh machines and seems to be popular software out there. So I'll link to all of these in the description. I'll show you just briefly the websites. We'll start with Studio One, and it's made by the company Presonus. The full version costs $400. There is a free version, but availability is incredibly limited, more limiting than what you'll have in GarageBand if you're on a Macintosh. It does have the rewire functionality, and it supports audio units and VST plugins, which is nice. Here's the website here. So obviously you can go through here and you can find specifically all the stuff that comes in it, including if you also just search things like virtual instruments, you can see the instruments that it comes with, the effects plugins, and what you're going to notice is the majority of these plugins are all going to overlap with what you have inside of something like Logic. Really, all the functionality is going to be almost identical to what we saw inside of Logic. It's just this is the Presonus Studio One take on it. Let's move over now to Cubase. Cubase is very popular. It's a DAW that's been around for quite a long time. It's made by Steinberg, and they're the people who first developed the VST, Virtual Studio Technology, plugin sort of framework. So it all began with these guys. The full version is $500. However, there are educational discounts available if you qualify, and I'll put all those links again in the description for the video. It supports VST, it supports VST3, which is basically an updated version of that VST framework and coding language, and it also offers rewire support. Typically, you would use Cubase as the host, and then you might bring something like Reason into it. Is Cubase any better than Studio One or better than Logic? Honestly, I would say no. It all depends on what is going to work for you. So you can go to the website, watch their video, check out the instruments and plugins that it's bundled with. But apart from that, there's not a whole lot else I can say. I've actually never used Cubase before in my life. So people who tend to use it seem to really like it, but I've never had the need to use it. And here's just the educational link, which will let you know if you qualify for a discount on the software or not. Let's now talk about the Mac daddy of them all, that being Pro Tools. It's available for the Macintosh and PC systems. It's made here in the USA by a company called Avid, which doesn't really have the greatest reputation in the world right now. The full version is $700. And again, they do have an educational discount available if you qualify. One thing about Pro Tools that is incredibly frustrating is that it only supports their own plugin format, which is called AAX. And I guess maybe the reason for them doing that was to try to avoid people using pirated software within their plugin or within their host application. But personally, I don't really trust the people at Avid a ton, and they are a publicly traded company, which is going to lead you to believe that profit is really what makes them operate. So if profit is the cause for the AAX plugin, I wouldn't be entirely surprised. This is, though, the industry standard. It's the DAW that's taught at many music recording schools, and it does offer rewire support. The fact that it's the industry standard means that Pro Tools is never really going to have to worry too much. They've kind of got their foot in the door at the right time, and so everybody who wants to learn about music production, especially in a very formal audio recording school setting, is going to learn how to use Pro Tools. However, Pro Tools can do the same thing that Logic can do. It can do the same thing that Cubase can do. Again, it's just going to do it a little bit differently. And they're going to offer a few different instruments, and they're going to offer a few different effects, all of which are unique to Pro Tools. Here's what the website looks like. And they've updated to Pro Tools 11 now. Don't really know if it's any better than Pro Tools 10, Pro Tools 9, Pro Tools 8. I encourage you to just kind of look and see, but all of the same features are going to be inside of Pro Tools that we've seen in the other digital audio workstations that we've looked at. And here's if you want to try and see if you can maybe get a break or a discount on it if you qualify. I don't know how much of a discount they'll give you though. I wanted to talk about, for me, what's probably the best bang for your buck in terms of digital audio workstation, and that would be Reaper. It's available for the Mac and PC. I actually used this like right after it got released, and right when it got released, they like had no limit on the demo. So after the 30 days, I was able to keep using it. But eventually, that all did wear out, and I don't have it on this computer, unfortunately, but it's a great program, and they have a great philosophy behind it. It's made by the American company Cocos. The full version is only $60 if your yearly gross revenue is under $20,000 a year, at least for making music. And probably that's everyone who's actually watching this video. Reaper works on a great philosophy, very much a trust system. They're assuming that if you go to buy it, that you're just going to be honest about whether or not you fit the criteria over here. This is really becoming the digital audio workstation of the future, and a lot of educational institutions now, especially the ones that aren't focused primarily on the recording industry and on the music business, they're going to be teaching out of Reaper because it is so cheap, $60, but it's just as functional as any of the other digital audio workstations we've talked about, with a couple of exceptions. Reaper doesn't come with any like built-in instruments. They have like this little synthesizer, but it doesn't really count, I wouldn't say. So there are no bells and whistles here. So you'll need to have some like freeware or some paid plugins if you want to use instruments, but it's a very, very powerful DAW, and it's capable of everything you could imagine for just a fraction of the cost. And really, what's so amazing about Reaper is that you really can do anything. It's just it might take a few more steps, but you can get there, and I think it's a really, really impressive DAW. In my own opinion, they do have lots of effects and analysis tools, and there's also a great community here with people working in Reaper. There's a lot of like open source to this particular software, so people have the ability to like make some edits, make some changes, build some more devices, and they'll oftentimes share those on the forum or on the website, so everybody can discuss, share, and learn together, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. At least in my opinion. All right, so just to recap what we just talked about, basically Reaper, Pro Tools, Cubase, Studio One, Logic, they're all going to have similar functionality. They're all just going to look a little bit different, and the devices that come built in with the program that ship with the actual software, they're going to vary a little bit. And at the end of the video, I am going to talk about sort of how it helps or my process for deciding on a DAW. Last two digital audio workstations we're going to talk about, Ableton Live and Bitwig. Ableton Live is made by the German company Ableton. The full version is $750, but the standard is just $450 there. They also offer educational discount. It hosts and supports AU and VST plugins, and it also has Rewire. There's a thing in it called Max for Live, which I won't talk about now, but in essence, it's a programming language, and you can specifically program devices to work inside of Ableton, which is really cool because a lot of people will go out of their way to make really neat and interesting things that you can then use inside a regular Ableton Live 9 set. I actually haven't updated to Live 9, but I can show you guys Live 8 quickly and just how it differentiates itself from the other digital audio workstations we've talked about. I'll give you a little teaser though. The thing about Ableton Live is that it really is designed for not only producing music in the studio, but also performing in a live setting, in a live environment. And what you'll notice also about Ableton Live is that they have a phenomenal community. There's always a ton going on the forums that they have here, and you can get lost in this website really quickly. I was actually just on it earlier, and there were some people who had some videos of their performances that they've done with the newest version, and it's absolutely blew my mind. And so, of course, I was like geeking out for about an hour, which was kind of embarrassing, but it did happen. And nowadays, a lot of the cutting edge stuff that's going on, a lot of people are working inside of Ableton Live. So from, uh, you know, electronic music to more of like a poppy EDM sound. I think that Gautier made somebody that I used to know inside of that. So this is Ableton Live when you first open it up, and it does look a little bit different. So far what we've been used to is seeing something like this. We've had a browser somewhere, we've had a timeline, and we've had some mix controls. In this case, this is the mix control for you here. But Ableton Live offers this view, which is referred to as the session view. And inside of the session view, you have the ability to load up a ton of different audio clips and MIDI clips, like as many as you want. And you can trigger these all back in what is referred to as scenes. So this is a scene here, this is scene 2, this is scene 3. But you don't necessarily just have to play straight across. I could be playing something here and also here at the same time, which makes it great for live performance. And when we're using Bitwig, we'll talk a little bit more about that. It comes with a bunch of different instruments, a bunch of MIDI effects and audio effects. All of this stuff we're going to talk about later in this particular course. But this is Ableton Live in a nutshell. So a lot of the stuff you're still going to see, it's exactly the same. We still have our fader controls. We still have a left-right pan here. We have audio effects. If we want to go over to the other side, we can do that. A little bit different for where we're going to put our effects, but for now, not really all that important for our uses. And last but not least, let's just touch on the actual program we're going to be working in, which is Bitwig Studio. It's available on the Mac, the PC, and the Linux. It's made by the German company Bitwig, and it's a very small group of developers. I think there's just maybe 11 people working for Bitwig right now. It has VST support, doesn't have AU support, which is kind of frustrating, but it can be used in live performance scenarios, and they've promised that there's a lot more to come. So we can look at Bitwig, of course, and see that we have something very similar to what we've already seen. We have our transport bar up here. We have a metronome. We have our different audio tracks or MIDI tracks that we want to have. We have a looper right here. We could enable that by clicking the loop button. And then if we want to access our devices, we have to click our browser right here. And again, with all of these programs, it's really just about opening up all the different tabs and panels that you might see. So if I want to get my mix up, here's a mixer view here, but from the arrangement view, I can actually do the same thing. And this is why I think Bitwig is very profound and is going to be a program that a lot of people are using in the future. It's because we have all of these different views, and if we want, we can take a look and oh my goodness, suddenly we have something very similar to the session view in Ableton Live that we were just looking at. But it has an arrangement view, and personally I think it has an arrangement view that just looks and feels a lot cleaner and a lot nicer. I've always struggled to work on the arrangement view inside of Ableton Live, but I think in Bitwig it's going to be very, very easy for me to do that. And again, we have our BPMs and our tempo markings here. So very, very similar to what we've seen before, but at the same time, a little bit different. And if I want, I can open up my browser. I can look at my devices, and maybe I want to load in a polysynth. I can do that. I can double click it. I can bring it up. And just like that, I've got audio playing back inside of Bitwig Studio. So if I want, we can look quickly at their website, and by looking at their website, you're going to see that it's really not complete yet, and they're still doing a lot of work on this particular program. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they're able to do. In the next video, we're going to look at the website in more depth and talk specifically about why we're using Bitwig Studio. But for now, just know that it is available, and it's very similar to a lot of the other DAWs that we've already looked at and discussed in this rather lengthy video. So let's go ahead and do a quick summary, and I'll talk about some conclusions, beginning with picking a DAW. For me, and this is just my philosophy, this is my opinion, you should always begin by thinking about cost versus practice. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean, at the very minimum, what do you think you need? And if you do just a little bit of research about the DAWs I've showed you here, you're going to realize that some DAWs are more well known for certain functions. So if you're recording a whole band, something like Pro Tools, something like Cubase, even something like Logic is probably the way to go. But if you're an electronic musician, specifically working with virtual instruments and virtual technology, you may not necessarily need to have that kind of level of accuracy for recording audio for recording a band. So you may not need Pro Tools. You might lean more towards something like Ableton Live, or lean towards Bitwig, or lean towards Reason, right? And then I look at it as what DAW offers what you need for the cheapest price. And I'm thinking that for us, the two big ones would be something like Reaper, GarageBand, Logic, and Bitwig. And I think Bitwig works the best because we can do both arranging music, making tracks from scratch, but we can also work on and try to figure out a way to do music live, to perform our music. The second aspect I always consider, which a lot of you might laugh about is actually aesthetics and the visual look of the interface itself. And ask yourself, what DAW has the best look to you? What just looks the sharpest? What looks the cleanest? What looks like you'd spend the most time in that DAW? What studio environment, if you're an artist, would you want to go into and not want to leave? This might seem silly, but you don't want to work in something that gives you a headache or that you just don't like. And this is my own opinion, but I've always felt like Pro Tools, it just feels like a retirement home, just the way it looks and just the layout of it. It just doesn't feel like something I'd want to work in for that long. Is it a phenomenal program? Is it incredibly flexible? And can you do some incredible stuff in it? Absolutely you can. But if I open it up, and the second I open it up, I feel like, I just want to close this program down, then that's not the right digital audio workstation for me. Again, I've picked Bitwig for this class because immediately upon opening it, I just really, really like the look of it. The scheme, the way the different panels are arranged, all of that just worked for me, where in the past, I've never actually opened something up and thought, wow, I don't want to close this program at one stage or another. I know in Ableton Live sometimes I could get just a little frustrated with the way it looked and with the way the arrangement page worked. Granted, I'm working on a small computer, and these are all just my opinions and me being a bit of a baby, but I did want to bring up that aspect to picking your digital audio workstation. The third factor to consider is the learning curve. So, do I have experience with any similar DAW? Obviously, if you spend a lot of time in GarageBand, makes a lot of sense to go into working in something like Logic. If you've never worked with anything before in your life, You can kind of start anywhere, but I think Bitwig is a good place to start. Uh, GarageBand, Audacity, all great places to start. And if you do have a ton of experience but want some more visual feedback, then obviously Reason is a great program to get into. All of these programs do the same stuff, but they do them differently and they look different and they approach it with different philosophies. So here are my closing points to this lesson. Number one, new does not mean better. Just because something is new doesn't mean that it's automatically better than anything else. In fact, most of the times when something new is released, it's still riddled with bugs that need to be dealt with and squashed. More does not mean better. So just because one program may have 8,000 instruments to it, it doesn't mean that it's better than a program that has 3 or 4 really, really good ones. And again, back to our art analogy. If you have the choice of thousands and thousands of colors for your one little canvas, how are you ever going to choose where to start and what to work with? If you just have 5 or 6 colors, you're going to be working right away and you're going to really focus on the relationships and what each of those colors is going to bring to the table, what it's going to bring to the composition. It's exactly the same thing in working with digital audio and working inside a digital audio workstation. Cost does not mean better. Just because there's one really, really expensive digital audio workstation doesn't mean it's going to be the best. Those prices are set for different reasons. And actually, Bitwig's price seems a little high at $400, but I think they didn't want to go too much lower than that for the fear of being considered a very weak and amateur type product when it's trying to do what Ableton Live does. And Ableton Live, of course, their full version, which does have tons and tons of samples and stuff, is over $700. Making music is always a personal thing. And some people are going to have to use Pro Tools because that's what the industry dictates. If you want to work and, be an intern or actually get a job at a real recording studio with tons of analog gear and, they get pop stars to come in and perform, you're going to have to learn Pro Tools because that's probably what they have. Some newer studios, I think, are using Logic now, but for the most part, you're going to encounter Pro Tools, and so learning and knowing Pro Tools will be a must for you. But for those of you who aren't really worried about that at this stage, something like Reaper and just using free plugins is all you're going to need. At the end of the day, just because one person has used one DAW and the other has used something else, that doesn't mean that one track is going to automatically come out any better. And I think that speaks for itself. There will always be criticism when something is new. People expect that the new releases or the latest update is going to be exactly the kind of change that they have in their head. And when that doesn't happen, they get critical, and it happens every single time. A day after Bitwig was released, of course, there's a big backlash from all these people who were expecting this sort of mystical, utopian digital audio workstation. It doesn't exist. There are features to it, but that perfect digital audio workstation for you, it's not going to be there. You always have to adapt. You always have to be willing to take what you get and do something creative and interesting with it. Most of the critical people too are probably just as well off keeping to the software that they already use because it's clear that they like it and that the new thing isn't matching it or surpassing it. If there's a new program that comes out and you don't feel like it's going to ever be any better than what you're already doing, then just ignore it and don't worry about it and move on with your time and keep making music the way you like to make music. Limitations are always a blessing in disguise. You don't want to have unlimited choices. Unlimited choices mean no work is ever going to get done because it's so hard to make those initial steps. And I've been there so many times. So I think having limitations can be great for you and for the work and for having fun. My philosophy is work with what you got until you can't work with it no more. Before jumping to plugins or other third-party effects, keep working with the tools you have. And when those become exhausted, then it's time to look somewhere else. But some of these things, like if you're working with Reason, I can't imagine that you're going to run out of things to try or things to do anytime soon. But for some of us, there are times where we really just have to grab that plugin and mess around with it. So I think for some people, it could last years and years and years without having to reach for something else. For others, it could be within a week. It just depends on the person. And remember, the DAW is just the building that you're working in, and it's what you put inside the DAW and the time and the effort. That's what it's going to make and differentiate your works of art from mine, from anybody else watching this video, or even the people who are just making music and not watching or caring about these videos that I'm making. And I think if you think about the DAW as just being the foundation, as just being the building, and then you imagine within that, especially if it's like an art studio, there's that specific room then you're working in. And then there's the materials that you have. And then there's the materials that you actually use. And there's the canvas, and there's the medium, and there's the process by which you go about, let's say we're painting, playing with color. And there's so many steps and there's so many stages to making a piece of art. And it's the same thing when you're making music, which is, of course, a piece of art. But I think you understand where I'm trying to go with that. Anyway, I hope that this has helped you guys out a little bit. I really just want you to realize that whatever you choose to go with, it's going to be fine. And you can make really interesting and great music no matter what you want to use. My recommendation is Bitwig because it's cheaper than Ableton Live right now. And we have the ability to do live performance controls as well as make our own music from that arrangement screen. And in the next video, we're going to take a closer look at Bitwig, look at their website, see some of the features that they offer and what they're planning to offer in the future. Thank you guys for watching.